Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Carrie Stern, and I'm the president of It Takes a Village. So I would just like to introduce Megan Cowan, and she's the co-founder and program director of Mindful Schools, and she will speak to us about mindfulness in our schools. Thank you.
Is it all right if I speak without a microphone? Okay. If at any point, I have a tendency for talking too loud anyway, but if at some point you can't hear me, either come closer or I can pick up the mic. I'm actually not probably better at introducing myself. I just always feel like the bio introductions feel, I don't know, they never really land for me. So I think a lot of what's in my bio comes out kind of in the talk in terms of our organization. But I am here from Mindful Schools. We're an organization currently based in Emeryville in the East Bay, and we've been providing mindfulness in education services since 2007. And tonight I want to share with you some of the work that we've done, share with you kind of this mindfulness in education movement. Maybe you've kind of caught wind of it, and if not, I'll fill you in about it, and also give you an overview and some experiential introduction to mindfulness, or maybe it's a reminder and you're coming very informed, but I want to give anybody that's coming new to mindfulness kind of the foundation of it, and so that you're walking out tonight kind of having a sense of what this mindfulness thing is all about and what this mindfulness in education thing is all about. And also because it's a presentation to parents, usually once I give this talk, or if parents are participating in our program some way, they want to know, what can I do at home to support this or reinforce it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what mindfulness in the home looks like, and what you can be considering coming out of tonight. So, before I start with all that, because I've got a ton of information in here, and I want to leave time for questions at the end, but it's helpful for me to hear, from a few people about just what inspired you to come tonight, and I can usually find my way to integrate things, and it helps to frame the talk. So anybody willing to just say, what about the description made you willing to give up your Thursday evening?
Yeah, I think what you said, how to apply it at home,
Yeah.
in the pace of life,
Yeah.
and to be able to kind of impart that upon the children.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yes?
I'm actually a teacher in the district, and I took the Mindful Schools training a couple years ago.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I loved it, and I'm just excited that Mill Valley School District is sort of embracing the Mindful Schools.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah,
I read the article in the Chronicle about your documentary.
great. Yeah.
I'm a postdoctorate in mindfulness and yoga studies and yoga philosophy, so I'm very passionate about it, and I see the difference when mindfulness is applied, and especially when we do it with young people. Their innate intelligence and creativity and joy remains intact, and when it's not, we see a lot of kids who are struggling, and then all the things we're trying to correct, actually there's a very simple, straightforward way to address it, and then we can all celebrate.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, you got your hand up too.
I'm also a teacher in the district, and I'm a certified yoga teacher and have that training as a background, but I have a class this year that I just felt like needed something a little more, and I've never actually practiced mindfulness, but I started about 3 weeks ago, I started with 2 minutes, and then we went to 3 minutes the following week, and now we're up to 4 minutes.
Awesome.
And they're loving it, like the first graders, and they absolutely love it. And so,
Super receptive.
yeah, so I was so excited to see that.
Awesome,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I'm a teacher in the district too, also first grade, and just looking for ideas of how to bring it into the classroom.
Great. Okay, great. So that's a good mix. Yeah.
And I'm a parent of a middle schooler and a high schooler, and I'm so excited to see this in the community. I'm hoping that I think it can really gear a lot of the kids who are stressed in high school to learn how to adapt in different ways besides what seems to be,
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
I'm a parent, but I've been reading more and more scientific evidence that mindfulness is very beneficial, especially with children with learning difficulties and certain behavioral problems. So I'm really interested to learn a little more about it.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a parent as well. I just would like to know more about it and also study at home, but get involved really. That's, I don't know here, and see that sometimes I face issues, and I go to the other or Brazil doesn't work. So, it's so what are the other?
What are some other alternatives?
Right. So that's why it's spoke to me.
Great. And just so I have a sense, can you raise your hand if you feel like you are brand new to mindfulness, like you saw the word printed, but great. Okay. And then anybody in here, a practitioner or been introduced for a while? Okay, great. So I give this presentation really as an introductory talk to kind of cover all bases, and those of you that are practitioners know that hearing all of this stuff again is more of just a reinforcement, so hopefully it's not redundant. After you leave, if you are brand new to mindfulness, after you leave tonight, now that it's on your radar, you will see that it's popping up everywhere. There's something about what mindfulness offers that has become really appealing, and there's something that feels kind of like people are thirsty for. And so mindfulness has been popping up in mainstream society increasingly over the last 10 years, but really it's been around for about 30. There's a very popular program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction that was created by a doctor, PhD, named John Kabat-Zinn. And his books and his program is really famous now, and it really kind of set the stage for mindfulness to start to be adapted and implemented in a variety of institutions and environments. And very simply put, mindfulness is just bringing awareness to our experience. It's relatively mundane that way. It's not complicated. It's not necessarily easy to do consistently, but basically mindfulness is bringing awareness to anything that we're experiencing at any moment. And to narrow that down a little bit or make it more concise, that it's what we're experiencing through our senses. So what we're feeling while we're sitting on the chair, the temperature, sound, the impact of seeing, taste, smell. It's kind of bringing our mental activity and our awareness and the externally oriented aspect of ourselves and dropping it back into our body to experience things at a sensory-based level, physiologically. And it's also bringing awareness to our internal experience of thoughts and emotions. So being able to start to recognize more consistently the inner world and how the thoughts and emotions that are going on inside us every day are impacting the way we feel, the way we interact, and the way we relate to our external environment. And I think that one of the reasons these programs are popping up and becoming really popular, and I don't mean just in schools, but like I said, John started his program actually in medicine to work with patients initially who had chronic pain. And it was based on this premise that when you have pain, there's two parts to that experience. There's the physical experience, and then there's our mental relationship to it. And we all kind of have had that experience of some physical discomfort and then however we feel about it. So there's two places where there can actually be suffering. And introducing people to mindfulness either gave them enough physical relief that they felt better, or it gave them awareness of their emotional relationship to it so that they weren't contracting around it so much, so they were just emotionally better. And that extended then pretty rapidly into the rest of medicine, so that mindfulness programs are being offered in hospitals throughout the country. And then was introduced to psychology is used extensively now as kind of adjunct treatment to many disorders in mental health. And then this sort of onslaught into schools. And it's been striking over the last 7 years how much demand there is for this type of programming and this type of training. And one of the reasons, I think, maybe this is a little ironic, but I think one of the reasons is because of how dysregulated and chaotic and challenging things are, kind of across society, but definitely in education. And I don't, we've worked a lot in public schools, but I don't limit that kind of chaos and challenge to just public schools. That there's a tone in society, in the way we're approaching life, that has created this sense of maybe some disconnect, or maybe you'll notice just the lack of attention. There's a speediness to the way things are going. We're constantly taking in input and stimulus. I heard a statistic recently that there's more information in one day of the New York Times than there was in an entire lifetime in 17th century England. That's profound. Because when you are taking in stimulus, when you're taking in information, it's affecting your nervous system, it's affecting your emotional state, it's affecting your mind. And when we don't have time to digest and integrate that information, it starts to have these side effects of disease, lack of attention, discomfort, kind of a disconnect, feeling like we don't really know necessarily what emotions are running us. We start operating really quickly and maybe are making decisions without being present. Do any of you notice those days when it's kind of full speed ahead and you're trying to just get things done, and you make decisions and they end up being ones that weren't thought out, and kind of you realize the consequences a few days later or however long? This kind of speediness that we're not taking time to settle. There's research that came out in the last year, I think, about the necessity for having pause in between taking in information. And this is on the heels of, at least in public education, No Child Left Behind, where I don't know if you're familiar with how that works, but teachers' days are scheduled by the minute. And that academic information is supposed to be going on all day. It's like 11 to 11:30 is math, 11:31 to 12 is reading, that kind of thing. And it's actually going against even research that speaks to the necessity of pausing just neurologically so that our brain can digest the information and take it in. There's, as you know, a really high increase in attention deficit disorders. And some of that may be attributed to this onslaught of stimulus and the lack of support or time or format and structure in any given day to allow the time to digest and rest. There's a big shift in the most recent generation in terms of how many things are just naturally acting as supports to regulate our nervous system. So I don't know where all of you grew up or exactly what generation you're part of, but I think most of us remember that there was a lot more unstructured time when we were growing up. We spent a lot more time outside unstructured, and even if it was inside, it was more unstructured. There's just less time in nature. There's a shift in how we're spending time with adults. So it used to be that there was, kind of the typical 6 p.m. dinner, and everyone was sitting around the table together. And what's happening during that time is regulation is happening. So there's things like that may or may not be in place in every household, but it's definitely less as a culture. And for young people, their main way of learning how to self-soothe and regulate their own experience and their own nervous system is via their caretakers. So how many of you think that a newborn has the ability to self-soothe?
The thumb.
The thumb, that's true, yeah. Basically, the research is showing, and there's a little bit of a debate in this, but basically research is showing that self-soothing in terms of emotional soothing comes at about 6 months. And then obviously it's not complete. So they're building their self-regulation and their self-soothing skills as they grow and get older. So the main way that they're regulating is through attunement to the adult. So when you think about our lives as adults and the stimulus that we're taking in, the speed of our lives, our ability or lack of ability to kind of have a regulated nervous system, a regulated emotional system, then we're being with our kids of whatever age, that there's a learning going on about how to handle that level of input and that level of stimulus. And in education, partly because of some of the way that education is structured, but also because of what's happening just in general society, that it's almost impossible to get a sustained attention span. And I think that we can all relate to this as adults. The last time that you were trying to read an article online or a book or a magazine, and just the distraction that happens, and you get to the end of the page and where have I gone type of thing. Or you're in conversation with someone and you want to be there, but suddenly you're off to your to-do list or what's happening next, or maybe you're just planning what you're going to say, but you've lost the attention with that person. So it's these kind of fundamental things, I think, are becoming really obvious to people in terms of the shift in how society is supporting attention and connection and emotional recognition and emotional navigation. So Mindful Schools started about 7 years ago, and we started bringing in programs to schools. So we were a direct service organization, which just meant that we brought in our program. Our instructors went into schools and offered programming in the classrooms. And we basically landed on a model that was rather arbitrary, but it was twice a week for 8 weeks, for 15 minutes at a time. So we would visit usually all the classrooms in the school twice a week for 15 minutes for 8 week period. And what we were doing was introducing them to all the different applications of mindfulness. In a moment, I'm going to offer some of the applications to you. But the kind of pillar pieces were, we were just teaching them mindfulness of sound and mindful breathing. Then we build on that, and they learn mindful seeing and mindfulness of the body, mindful eating, mindful movement, mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of emotions, mindfulness on the playground. So that we start to extend presence and awareness to everything that's happening in their experience. With adults, the research that's been done in the last 30 years is pretty extensive, and the benefits of mindfulness are pretty broad. They cover a lot of physical and mental aspects. And when we were going into education, we were looking for slightly different results, or just different impressions. And basically what we've learned over the years is that the benefit of mindfulness, it's fortunately providing improvements both in the academic efforts, but also in the social emotional efforts. And the reason I say fortunately is because when you're speaking to a school, whether it's parents or teachers or administrators, and I was looking to see if the principal was here because he'll appreciate this, that there is a certain hat that you have on that is interested in academics. And then there's another hat that we have on that's interested in the overall well-being and social and emotional intelligence of our kids. And the ways this is showing up is one of the main benefits is the improvement of attention or concentration. And it's not, the benefits are, I always feel it's really important for me to offer qualifications to the benefits, because there's a tendency without a full picture to think that we're improving attention and so we can have kids focus more often and for longer. And actually the skill that's being developed is to recognize the nature of attention so that they can be empowered around where they're placing their attention. So it's not meant to create this more robotic, more powerful attentive machine. It's meant to support the ability to track with where their attention is going. So that if they are staring out the window and then they notice it, there's a stronger empowerment and a stronger ability to redirect. There's a kind of metacognition that starts to get developed. Metacognition is the knowing that you know. So it's a slightly more empowered directive for our mind. And the other main benefit that's really evident is the improvement of impulse control. So that just means those physical things that we do or the things that come out of our mouth that we later wish we didn't, right? Has anybody ever done that? So, and again, the qualification for this is it doesn't mean that kids will no longer be impulsive, or that they will no longer say things that they didn't mean or that hurt someone, or that they will no longer burst out and hit someone or throw something. That we're not trying to suppress or repress the normal childhood development. So the impulse control is around the ability to start to recognize where the impulses are coming from in our body, what's causing them, and noticing them. Because the only reason you say something you wish you didn't, or you hit in a way that you wish you didn't, is because in that moment, right before you said it or did it, you weren't present. There was not a thoughtful, reflective you going on. And the only way we can access that is if we're spending time in here. So the program is designed in very short moments to introduce young people to their inner world and to spend time just resting there. So that it's not always outward, it's not at the ding of the phone or the text or Facebook or email or whatever might be coming in. That to take small moments each day where we're just resting in ourselves. And it naturally starts to create a familiarity with ourselves and how we're operating, what motivates us, where our impulses come from. Any questions so far? Yeah.
When is it good not to be mindful? Or
when is it good not to be mindful? How would you answer that?
well, when you're saying the unstructured time, that's good, and is that how to be unstructured without total lack of mindfulness?
How to be unstructured without lack of mindfulness?
Yeah, without lack.
What I was referring to that we don't have as much unstructured time, we don't have as much time in nature, we don't have as much time necessarily with young people being regulated by the adults around them. What I was referring to is that there's something in those scenarios that naturally starts to calm the nervous system. And so one of the reasons mindfulness is becoming more popular, I think, is because that baseline of normal has been lost. That we define normal as like mildly agitated and mildly stressed out all the time. That's normal. Low grade stress, morning to night. That has become the new normal. And it's not comfortable for anyone. So because those things that were in place before are not really there, we're kind of reinserting pause and time for our system to re-regulate. And in the unstructured time, there's not necessarily formal mindfulness or formal, awareness and moment-to-moment presence with how things feel physically and the sounds and the sights. But there's a chance for our nervous system to start to settle inward, so that presence is coming back in instead of the outward movement. So when you ask when is it not good to be mindful, if by that we're saying when is it good to not be aware of ourself, I would say never. But what I said at the beginning is that it's not necessarily easy. So some of you may be struck by tonight's talk, and once we practice it a little bit, you might go, wow, that feels great, and I think I'm just going to continue doing that, and you're going to walk out the door and promptly forget. So it's actually uncultivated in us. This presence and being in ourself is uncultivated. And so that's what these programs are reinserting.
Well, I was also thinking that walking, breathing, and water are free.
Yes.
And that's why, it's not the fad. Or, I mean, the people aren't making money off of walking, breathing, and mindfulness.
Right, they're not. Yeah, that is it, and that's why I don't have a PowerPoint. What I want to impress is that this is just innately available in us. It's an innate human capacity to have self-awareness, but it's not really formally introduced for most of us. And that's one of the things that this does. It's really advocating for a reorientation for how we are approaching our life and what we value as important and as successful. I don't know if any of you track Ariana Huffington or if you like her, but she recently wrote an article and she's been giving talks on the third metric for success. And basically, instead of money and power, can we add a metric around happiness? And then what goes into that metric of happiness? And it's a fundamental reorientation. And for some of us, it's actually not an easy one. Like, it makes sense that if I have power and money, I'll be fine. And so but the third one is a way of looking inward, and it's reframing what we're giving priority to. And there's a kind of cliche phrase in mindfulness, but since most of you are new, you won't have heard it before, but it's that we are human beings, not human doings. But it's a hard framework to withdraw from, because how many of you, when you get a free moment, there's this impulse like, I should be doing something? Or if you take an hour on the couch, you're like, I'm so lazy. There's this pressure that we're putting on productivity and contribution. The reframing from doing to being comes from asking ourselves, what's the quality of my doing? And the investigation of, does practicing being, does spending time being, inform my doing in a different way? When we spend time being, we're finding stability in our body and in our nervous system and in our emotional system that deeply influences the way we meet our experience and the way we do activities. So it's not a replacement, it's just a desperate rebalancing of how being and doing are playing roles in our lives. So I feel like that's a good segue into a little bit of practice. Talking about it can give you some sense of it, but I want you to get a deeper sense of it. So I'd like to just take you through a little bit of a guided mindfulness. And some of this, I'll integrate some of the way we do things with kids, but I'm going to give a little bit more of an adult version. And yeah, you can put things down if you want, but you don't have to. Mostly I want you to just check into your body and see if you're comfortable. And if there's something that's not comfortable at this moment, then you can make a little readjustment. And start to let gravity be recognized. So letting gravity kind of be felt and letting it do its job right now, so that things in your body start to relax. Let your bones get heavier, let your muscles kind of melt to the floor. Let your shoulders relax. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your bottom on the chair. And then if it's comfortable, let your eyes close. And if not, you can just let them kind of have a vague gaze forward or down. And even if there's some physical agitation or mental agitation, which can be totally normal, especially at the end of the day, kind of giving way to just the felt sense of gravity, relaxation. And a willingness for the next few minutes to let go of any time thoughts are starting to take over. And bringing awareness to your breathing, and start doing that by just taking one deep breath. And then letting your breath just return to whatever its normal state is right now. One of the ideas sometimes is to try and get some continuous moments of presence with your experience. So noticing that there's an inhale and an exhale. And for a few breaths, following the entire breath, the inhale, the exhale. And then just as a little bit more exploration of a different sense, moving your awareness to sound. So of course sound is always happening. Mindfulness just means you're bringing awareness to it. You don't have to do anything about the sound. You might even just imagine that you're sort of a blank canvas and the sound just comes and lands, and then it's available for another sound. If there's thoughts, it's totally normal. There's just a moment of recognizing that, and then going back to receiving. And then another deep breath. Keeping your awareness kind of grounded in that weight of gravity, so that you're going to stay in your body when you open your eyes. And just noticing what it's like to kind of receive the room instead of coming out into it with your eyes and ears. And opening your eyes when you're ready. So I always like to check in after that because there's a lot of really good information that usually comes out in the comments. And so I'd like to hear from a couple people who are willing to share what that was like. Yes?
I realize how little time I actually breathe during the day.
Totally.
Maybe you're gonna let this down a little bit.
Totally. And I mean, the research on that has long ago that just the necessity of deep breaths for oxygen to the brain, for everything to operate. Yeah. Anybody else?
It felt nice to just sit still.
Right,
It was so calming.
right. That relief of
Even
just
for
stopping.
just that short little bit.
The trick here is that it was short. If I left you here much longer, then inevitably there would be plenty of discomfort, physical or mental. But even though it was short, there's usually somebody in here that's just like, terrible, that was sucked. Is there anybody on that team that's willing to say it? Yeah, can you say a little bit about it?
I mean, just distracted, busy.
Right. So sometimes it's that, and then sometimes it's just like very, restless and uncomfortable, and I didn't want to do it kind
Like
of
I
feeling.
want to do it later, alone.
Yeah. So there's a few important things that I want to point out here, and then I want to talk about kind of at home what things can look like. But one is that, did most of you feel some sort of relief? Right, okay, so that's an obvious side product of mindfulness. It's really important that we don't fixate on that as the purpose. It's fine to use it for that, and it's important actually to use it for that, because like I said, everything is a bit out of whack, and that relief that you felt should be happening multiple times a day, not once ever, So it's important that you have the familiarity with it, to be able to use it, to just kind of recognize, a state of chaos and stop and like regroup and come back and feel that. But the reason it's important not to fixate on that is because the purpose of mindfulness actually isn't to be calm. It's to become familiar with the entire spectrum of our experience, and to change the way we're relating to particularly the challenging experiences. So it's this framework on life that is not denying the challenges or thinking that we should be fixing them or making them go away or changing them. It's that our relationship to it is the key. It's the key to understanding them, it's the key to managing them, and it's the key to them changing if they have that potential. So when we think that it's all about being calm, and then we sit here and our mind is going all over the place, then we're just like, either I did it wrong, or I'll do it later, or this is not gonna work. And the reality is that both of you were having a reality check. That it's like, that's when you stop. Like I said, if I left you here for 5 or 10 minutes, everybody would start to have that. Most people would. And what it is it's the first time, or a rare time, that we look inward to see what's actually going on in there. And what's actually going on in there is the thing that's driving what we do out here. So we want to become friendly with that and familiar with that, but also accepting of the range that it is, so that we're not saying, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not doing something right, or whatever the voice is of not being good enough, or whatever. We want to be able to have acceptance around all those experiences so that they're moving through in a more comfortable way. And though that ability sort of builds naturally when we spend time each day being with ourselves. And I introduced you to mindful breathing and mindful listening in a very manualistic way. And mindfulness, we can be present, we can be aware of anything at any time, but it's nice to have these kind of anchors or tools that give us a sense of where our mind is. It's a way to kind of gather attention and stabilize, so that we have the capacity to be aware of the multitude of things that are experiencing inside and outside. Anything else about that experience from anyone? Yeah.
I sort of have a segue.
Yeah.
What about Alzheimer's, dementia, stroke victims who aren't, their mindfulness has changed?
Their mind has changed.
Their mind has changed.
Yeah.
How would you help them?
I'm sure there's some research on this, but I don't really think that I can speak to it. The most recent research that I heard about Alzheimer's and dementia is that the most preventative, or I think preventing it from getting worse, is to have them freestyle dance. So I think that to answer this from as a mindfulness person, that I would be more interested in how people are being with them. And this is a great segue into mindfulness at home, because so I'm going to go on and then tell me if it answers your question in any way, but when people ask me, what can I do at home? Or even teachers, what can I do in my classroom? We teach teachers how to integrate mindfulness explicitly into their classroom, like how to teach their kids mindfulness. But actually the primary thing that we are teaching, and the woman who took our course I think she went out with her baby, but the primary thing we're teaching is mindful teaching, not teaching mindfulness. We have a curriculum, that's what people come to our course for, but then we're just talking, is all about you. You know, that if you want your classroom to change, if you want your house to feel different, it's not about giving the kids the techniques so that they calm down and that they're quieter and that when I say stop, they stop and that they're more well-behaved. And I know we wish that, but really if we want a shift to come, it's from how we're being and what they're attuning to. Do you know the feeling as a parent or as a teacher, those days when you are just frazzled and for whatever reason you ended up on the wrong side of the bed and you're just mad all day long and you don't catch it and it's just like, and the kids respond pretty much to that. You know, it's not 100% of the time, sometimes they can turn you around. If they turn you around, it means that their nervous systems are more regulated than yours. But there is a tangible energetic relationship. Physics, yeah. And so when we're thinking of our kids and their behavior and how hard it is and what we want our classroom to be like, that we can address that by teaching them mindfulness. But the strongest impact is going to come from us. And then obviously if both are happening, there's the kind of snowball positive effect. But to frame this for your own investigation of what's happening in my nervous system, basically whose nervous system is in charge. And you know how that can spiral also when the kid's throwing a tantrum and then we get all outside of ourselves and it just goes badly. I have a friend, we were visiting recently in LA and her kids are teenagers now, but we were standing in right in the entryway of her house and I don't remember what we were talking about, I think tantrums. And she pointed to the corner and she said, I spent many an hour in that corner holding my kids through tantrums. And she's this really lovely person and I could just picture that she would, when they're small enough that you can contain them, hold them while they're just having their tantrum and she's just regulating herself. Like that tantrum is just going to have its own life. But they're learning by how we're responding to that. Just like in the classroom, kids are learning how we respond to the unexpected interruption that comes through the door, or the fight that happened on the playground, or the kid that comes in late, or the fact that no one's listening at that moment, or that no one put away the art project. They're learning from the way we respond to all of that. Were you raising your hand?
I'm nodding yes.
Okay, yes.
Thinking about, I used to give workshops at the Federal Reserve Bank, and the students I had were all fellow analysts that were in their 20s.
Yeah.
In my last workshop, I felt they were drifting away, so I felt a definite need to impose somehow get control. So I pulled out a $100 bill, which was a fresh bill, and snapped it in front of them. That did it. Whoever answers this question, this $100 bill is yours. That got everyone's attention because I did something to override what was going on and to somehow put my signature out there.
Right. And actually, to me, what you're speaking about is how we can extend our containment of a room. That as a teacher, for example, if you're in the front of the room and they're talking in the back, there's a way that you can extend your beingness to kind of include them. So there's a felt sense of pulling everything in. And there's a way that your nervous system can kind of capture another nervous system. So,
But isn't that like trying to be controlling? No?
no, actually, that will backfire. Usually any attempt to kind of apply mindfulness because you want things to change, it will have a felt sense of control in the room, and they're kids, and they don't like that, and so they won't. There's a quality of receptivity and kind of patience that over time develops more and more with mindfulness, so that it's more, instead of a like, I need your attention, it's more an invitation. It's like your stability and your kind of bigness is inviting them in. And it's because it's not judging the situation as being bad or coming from a place of wanting to change it or fix it. There's a lot of this that's simple when we're sitting in a room together and with an attentive audience, and you know the way I'm saying the way it works. In reality, this is a practice, and it fails and it succeeds, and it fails and it succeeds. But the reference point is what we're always going back to. It's like restabilizing in myself. Total chaos. I just said something that I wish I didn't. You know, I yelled at the kids or whatever it is, and then that's the moment we get to restabilize. And then try again. Yeah.
Have you done any studies on how the kids react if you label mindfulness or if you don't? Like if you say, let's take a breath instead of a mindful minute, or?
You know, I felt really adamant about keeping the word mindfulness in our program. And it's funny because now in the last 7 years, mindfulness has become, at least in my bubble, has become so popular. And there's this kind of feeling of it's too general and too superficial. And, you know, it's very broad now. So people's definition of mindfulness ranges vastly. And so I have this slight aversion to the word. But I feel like it's actually been an advantage for kids because, and the reason I felt adamant about it was I wanted to give them a word they didn't have any association with. And, you know, take a breath, like that's the last thing we usually want to hear when we're upset. But, and there's a way to say that without being, you know, aggressive about it. But yeah, I just felt like it was important that there was a clear skill that was being developed. And that it wasn't just about being calm, and it wasn't just about being resilient. No, actually, we're doing mindfulness. And I find that it helps to create a container and an environment where they know there's a shift. We can be mindful anytime, but if we establish kind of consistent moments of mindfulness throughout the day, like the 2 minutes or 4 minutes, that when you say it's time for mindfulness, there's like, oh, that means things change. That means I stop and I get to close my eyes, and there's a distinct shift in what we're doing. So I haven't done research on it, and I always tell people to do what works. So
I'm just wondering if, like the kids, my son does it at Mill Valley Middle with a few teachers.
Yeah.
One of whom is here, and you know, one of them calls it a mindful minute, and I'm just wondering, like, at a certain stage, they say, oh, it's not cool, you know, but I think they all get something out of it.
I haven't found that. I mean, there's always kids that don't respond or that don't like it, but I don't think it's because of the use of the word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would be looking for, is how to apply it to the different ages, because I work with 5-year-olds, and we haven't termed it mindfulness, but a drumming teacher started working with us about a year ago, and he would talk to them about deep listening. So for a minute, we're going to do deep listening. And we liked it so much that we use it often now. Oh, we're going to, you know, take a minute and do deep listening. And just the whole group silence, you know, just brings it to everyone. But then I have some teenage kids at home, and I find that really difficult to as you say, you can't make them mindful, but it's harder to set the environment for them in your own home.
Well, that's the main point I want to make for parents, by starting it by saying like it's really about you, is that you can invite your kids to do mindfulness once, and if they show any kind of resistance or lack of interest, I say back off. Because it was sort of just incidental that we ended up being in schools, like we wanted to work with kids and they're usually at school, so we went to schools. But it was a little bit accidental that how perfect that environment is for teaching something like this, because they're in a learning ready environment. Like anything that comes in is new and they know that that's what they're there for. And the dynamic at home usually is them trying to gain autonomy. So they're not wanting to hear what you think they should be doing. And sometimes I hear parents that have success with it, but usually I feel like if the kids are getting it at school, that's great, because then you can ask them what they're learning at school and you can give this power shift where they can be teaching you something. That for me is the most ideal way for it to happen. But if they're not getting it in school and they're not responsive to your invitations, then for the most part I say be the model. Let them learn and let it take years. That you're not expecting a quick shift over a week. And then the last thing on that, and then I'll come here, is that if they are receptive, then there's different things for different ages. And basically, the younger ones, if you have any kind of bedtime routine or morning routine, to insert something consistently so that it's something you're committed to, because otherwise you won't prioritize it. But to insert 2 minutes into some sort of routine that's just mindful listening or just mindful breathing or calling it deep listening, I'm not opposed to using any words. And then with older kids, finding out what their level of interest is and practicing with them. And the key is consistency, really thinking about if you have the commitment within you to create something consistent that they can participate in. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, at what age can the kids grasp the concept? At what age is it, let's play a game and let's listen, versus I want to explain this whole concept to you?
The question is around what age can kids grasp this concept? In the most ultimate sense, this is not a concept, it's an experience. And so if we ask when's the youngest age they can grasp the experience, it's quite young. Because it's just a visceral acknowledgement. And the younger they are, the closer they are to that. But the younger they are, like preschool, then you want to make the concept piece much less explicit, right? It's just kind of, you reference it. It's like, everybody feel your feet on the ground? That's a moment, a moment of mindfulness. Everybody take a breath, and then you move on to the story or the game or whatever. So very young, it's literally one moment here and there. But at kindergarten, I start talking about mindfulness. I just don't talk about it very much. Like the first day, I don't even think I really define it. I just introduce them to the experience. And that, for all kids, is immediate. That ability to recognize felt sense is immediate. The thought stuff, like being able to recognize thoughts, that's even surprising to some adults, that you have thoughts that you can watch or notice. But I still talk about thoughts with kindergartners, I just do it in a slightly different way, and then around second grade they can start to kind of track that. Any other questions? Yeah.
I feel like I've sort of converted to the religion, and I've read enough that I know it's really helpful for so many things, but I'm how do we move on from here?
Yeah.
I've heard people say, go take this meditation class, and it just doesn't seem like learning to meditate is really going to get me to where I want to be. Eventually it might, but I almost feel like you were training for parents. As well as teachers.
It's on our strategic plan for this year, yeah.
Where can I, my child's teacher's been doing it, and he's really responded to it.
Yeah.
But what happens if his teacher next year doesn't do it? So is there,
Yeah.
you know, where else can I go to help him access these things and tools that I think can really help for him? He's not going to listen to me.
Sure. Well, in terms of the first statement about feeling like you would need our training to do this, or you know that you need to meditate for a long time to kind of grasp it, I really want to encourage you that shifts can happen rather quickly. The key is that you are actually interested. You know, not everyone's interested in that inner world and like how that relates to the external world. Like, I think that some people are just taken by it, you know, that it becomes fascinating. So there's this kind of drive to like, you know, find 5 minutes in the day to just stop and see what happens. Like, that's interesting to me. And so part of it is just being okay if that's not interesting. And then there's other ways to insert it into your life that is more like and I'm not saying you're one or the other, but there's other ways to kind of find to insert it into your life that's not so much work in a way, you know? So I'll give you a few references or books that you might want to look at. There's an author named Dan Siegel. And actually, you could just read all his books and then be pretty, you'd cover a lot of territory, because basically his work started researching the parental attachment. Then he moved into mindfulness and the nature of the brain and neuroscience and what mindfulness does to the brain. So all of his books are fascinating, but his two recent books are about youth. And the first one is called The Whole Brain Child. And that is geared toward parents, but I totally recommend it for teachers also. And it's about how you can reference mindfulness or use mindfulness or recognize mindfulness or apply mindfulness from infant to preteen, I think. Maybe even a little bit older. But it's a really good book. And it's kind of along the lines of like, I don't really have time to like develop a practice or anything, but what are some things I can be noticing just on a daily basis in terms of how I'm relating to my kid, or things that I can be telling them to do or asking them to do. And then his newest book is called Brainstorm, and it's about the adolescent brain. So if any of you have teenagers right now, I really recommend it. He sort of debunks some myths of the adolescent brain and just reframes it in a way and talks about what's happening in their brains during those years. Highly recommend that.
Can they read it?
Yes, I think it is meant for both.
He does. He says that in the introduction also.
Yeah.
So it is definitely meant as well.
Yeah, and I find that kids of all ages, but particularly adolescents, are incredibly empowered when they hear about what's going on in their brain. I don't know what it is. The brain is like this. It's like it hypnotizes people, you know, you see a picture of the brain and someone says something that it does and you're like, okay, and they just believe it. But I find that adolescents, when they hear how their brain is operating in response to their anxiety or their depression or their sadness or their confusion, it's like a relief, because it depersonalizes it, I think, and they feel like they have a little bit more capacity to deal with what's going on. So I recommend both those books. And is there another parenting book that comes off the top of my head? There's an author named, I'll say her name, but I don't think I remember how to spell it, but it's Shefali. Her first name's easier to spell, and her first name is Shefali, Shefali. Tasbury, Tsabary, I think. And her book, I think, is called Conscious Parenting. And I recently discovered her. I think she's amazing also. And in terms of, if you are interested in a mindfulness practice for yourself, even just as an exploratory class, there are things that you can do. I'm sure there's places you can go in Marin and other places in person. You might look up MBSR. There's probably an MBSR course somewhere around here.
ESR?
Oh, MBSR, what I was talking about earlier, the mindfulness-based stress reduction.
The Osher Center has
The Osher Center has that, and I'm sure there's a class somewhere at Kaiser MBSR, right. So you can find MBSR programs, and then, yeah, that's basically what I can recommend with that. And then Mindful Schools has an online 6-week intro course. So just if you want something that fits more into your schedule, and it's a little less clinical than the MBSR programs. Yeah, so it has a slightly different angle, but it's a 6-week introduction. It's just about personal practice. It's not about what you can do with or for your kids. It's really meant to start to establish that foundation of the practice for yourself, to start to see how that influences your life before thinking about implementing it with kids. And I really recommend it. It's online. I never thought that would work, but most people seem to like it. But depending on your temperament and your facility with the internet, then you might not, you know. So yeah, I think those are the references I would give. Yes.
You were talking earlier, you said something about Ariana Huffington's third dimension.
Third metric.
And
yeah.
I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to the intersection between the neuroscience around mindfulness and the neuroscience around happiness.
Well, as you know, that's another book of Dan Siegel's, is The Mindful Brain, and he has a couple other books on neuroscience, but you might notice all the research that's coming out on neuroscience, and it's all correlated. Oh, another resource is the Greater Good Science Center. They're tracking all the research on happiness, to put it very simply. They're tracking a lot, but when I was talking earlier about mindfulness and how it's not about creating calm, like that's a nice byproduct, but it's about developing a relationship with ourselves so that we're able to hold the variety of experience with more equanimity over time. And so that means that, you know, if you have equanimity while you're angry, you know, if there's like an underlying place of stillness, even though there's anger or frustration, I would call that happier than if there's anger and there's no underlying place of stillness. And then if you're happy and there's equanimity, meaning the equanimity means that whether the experience is positive or negative, there's a stillness, so that we're not either like wanting the anger to go away or wishing that the happiness would stay. So I don't like to say that mindfulness causes happiness or creates happiness, because it's a little bit it's a little bit of like a 1 degree off from, but in kind of relative terms, that yes, it's because one of the things that mindfulness does for a lot of us is create a greater sense of autonomy. And I think that that's another huge benefit for kids. You know, I've been working in schools, and I noticed kids, there was either sometimes this feeling that kids were angry, or just that there was just this like tension and frustration. And it was so consistent, no matter what the demographic was and what the school was and what the day was. And I started to kind of reflect on it, and I realized that as kids growing up, they're basically, their whole life is coordinated. They're always at the demands of other people. Someone is always telling them where to go, what to do, how to do it, when to do it, you know, to some extent. In fact, I don't know if any of you caught NPR this evening around 5:30, quarter to 6. Did you hear it? Mm-hmm. There's a book that I had not heard of called Hey Parents, Leave Those Kids Alone. And I was like, oh, this is such an important aspect, because, you know, when we're giving these talks, we talk a lot about the attunement that I was talking about, and like the way you are with your kids. And I feel like we're giving this impression sometimes that like you should be with your kids more. But it's not true. It's more the quality of presence that we're emphasizing, not the like, you know, are you okay? It's not the like, I want to make sure you're okay and I want to regulate you, you know, because I'm regulated. It's the quality of presence that you're offering when you're just around them. Availability when you're with them. And so, Yeah, and so the other side of it that this woman was just highlighting that I thought was sort of apropos for tonight was that I was talking about our generation, or one or two generations ago, that we were outside more, we had more unstructured playtime, there wasn't as many concerns about dangers and safety, and so we were not with adults as much as kids are now. And her observation and her research is about how kids are constantly aware that they are being watched. And how does that change their behavior and their experience? And how are they building the capacity to literally and figuratively fall down and get up? So this mindfulness and this attunement and this being present with our kids is not advocating for the hand-holding or the solving every problem. It actually, if you're practicing, it's creating a greater sense of safety in you that's providing safety for them, and what you were saying, the availability. Like, if you're grounded, they know you're available, even if they're somewhere else. So it's more that there's a trust that gets established so that your nerves aren't constantly being triggered because of what might happen. That mindfulness starts to settle those kind of anxieties. They're noticing that, and what you're telling them is, I trust, so you can trust, so you can go explore the world. And when you fall down, I'll be here, and it will also be okay. So I just thought it was a nice input to hear that tonight, and I don't know why I started talking about that. Yeah.
So a couple of comments. One is that what I find with the mindfulness is that a lot of the stuff maybe that I or we would worry about for our kids, with that mindfulness and that growing awareness, I realized, oh, this isn't about them. This is just some irritation, energy, or something that I have been carrying maybe for a long time. And so then what happens, it ends up getting projected out, whether it's my child or my spouse or my coworker or my students in the classroom. And the mindfulness gives me the space and the breath, literally the breathing room to go, oh, yeah, everything's a lot better than I thought it was. And that if I could just stay in my own business.
There's a lot of reduction in story with mindfulness because you're checking into what's actually happening right now. And what's actually happening right now is much more simple than the story that we're telling. Like, it's just my feet on the ground. It's just that I'm a little bit warm. It's just that I hear an echo. It's just that my shoulders hurt a little bit. And then if you start thinking about your kids, it's just that I'm worrying if they're okay. But that's where it stops. It's that recognition. You recognize the thought. But what's normally happening without awareness is that thought goes into repeat, so it's just like on, what is it called? A loop. It goes on a loop, and yes, and it can get worse, or it just keeps repeating, and so your nervous system is still revved up every time you have that thought. So when mindfulness is present, you get to notice the thought. You don't even need to make the thought or the feeling go away. It's the recognition, and then kind of the presence and the receptivity that allows it to have its own resolution. Yeah.
So going along with that and the statement you made a while ago about emotions coming through.
Yeah.
Rumi has a wonderful poem that I heard years ago, The Guest House.
Yeah.
So you could Google it, but it's wonderful, like about all the emotions being a visitor in your body.
Yeah.
I find that poem to be great for adolescents also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I just want to offer that concept, and you talked a lot wonderfully about that when you set the tone, then they will respond. And there's actually a term, as I'm sure you well know, it's entrainment. And so that's a concept if you want to look up that also. It's entrainment where, and it's a physics thing.
Yeah.
And there's lots of interesting research where you put a bunch of clocks in a room, and then over time, when you leave them alone, suddenly all the clocks are ticking with that one clock that had the strongest vibration. So this is the theory of entrainment is what it is. So if that really resonated with you tonight, you can look that up and start to see it, intellectually as well as experientially what that is. it's really, really, it's just so fascinating, and wonderful.
Thank you.
No,
That's
thank
great.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of back to the Maggie question, the mindfulness and happiness. Like last night, I just caught a little bit of the Happy program at PBS.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm just gonna ... that.
Okay, well, I can pick that up. There was a study done, this is a few years ago now, I think, on happiness, and it was a very extensive study, like 20 years long and thousands of people or something, and they were looking at how happiness impacts the people around you, and I might get the percentages a little bit wrong, but basically, happiness affects 3 people out. So if I'm happy and you and I chat, you have a 25% increased chance of feeling happy. And then later you go off and you talk to that person, they have a like 16% increased chance of feeling happy. And then the third person removed has a 5% increased chance of feeling happy. And basically what it established or pointed out was the emotional contagion. And just this idea that every emotion is emanating from you. And the stronger it is and the less awareness that's present with it, that's critical, because we don't want to tell people that they can't be angry, otherwise it will be contagious. That when there's no awareness and the stronger the emotion, the more kind of felt it is. But just keep in mind this idea that happiness and other emotions can be contagious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was, when you first brought up happiness at the beginning, I was sort of secretly hoping that it was going to go away, in the sense that I have this, as you've been talking, I sort of had this picture in my mind of the mindfulness people and the happiness people maybe not actually getting along. And in a good way.
Yeah, yeah.
In a sense that my own gut feeling is that happiness is a little bit overrated. And in that it's not our one, in a mindful, aware sense, certainly one that I'm trying to cultivate in students and my own children.
Yeah.
Happiness is one of a wide range of choices.
Right.
Right? And so I'm thinking of this, a big topic for me is how we educate young boys. Mm-hmm. And I hate the idea that all those very good little girls out there may appear to be happy, mm-hmm. and the boys do not, for example, mm-hmm. and that we're trying to contain them into a way that may look like settled and happy, but mm-hmm. isn't necessarily aware enough to be aware and expressive and working through things.
Right. It's not always evident what's going on inside, for sure. And what you're speaking to is, I think, what we were saying when you asked a question about how are happiness and mindfulness related, and that I was just saying that mindfulness is about becoming aware of the entire spectrum. So, but that's not to diminish our efforts for happiness. You know, we're human beings, and that's a very valid striving. And that how we define happiness is going to be very varied. And I think that like Arianna Huffington's third metric, her idea of happiness included what is well-being and kind of self-realization. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a parent, not an educator, and I do have a meditation practice. And I would say I do think, my kids kind of make fun of me, but they also sometimes sit on my pillow, and it's definitely there, and they're aware of it. But I'm surprised. I have a 6th grader, and she'll every once in a while say, "Oh, they do meditation at school," and she kind of scoffs at it because she's very cool. But I guess I came here thinking I was going to hear about maybe curriculum in the school, and how is a parent aware of what's going on? It's kind of a new movement, and besides if you have like a one single teacher, you might be able to communicate. But when your kid has 6, 7
right.
teachers, are you just relying on them to tell you what's going on, or I just don't know how much they're getting.
how much parents
my
are getting.
kids are, what my kids are getting exposed to as this.
Right.
I have no idea that this is happening at MVMS,
Mhm.
either as a specific program or as
Is it?
individual.
It's
The
not
principal is here.
happening, I'm the principal.
Yeah.
It's not happening as a program throughout the school, but there are definitely a couple of teachers who have been interested in that, and
Yeah.
that's a way of starting their classes.
Yeah.
And just, and I think it's just about two. And they're both teach some graders. Maggie's one of them, yes. And so it's not, I'm here just because I want to understand it and
Yeah,
learn
yeah.
about it and find out what this is so that we can understand it and the staff too.
Yeah, so I think like when there's a formal program in a school, whoever's offering it might, send home a weekly bulletin or include some, a few sentences of what they're learning. But that has to be pretty formalized so that it could be a blanket newsletter that's the same in every classroom or something, so that's a little bit challenging. But I think if you're hearing wind of it, I think teachers would be, delighted that you're interested also. And I would just check it out.
And how great that the principal's here.
Yeah.
We start all of our meetings, we're at Kaiser, we start all of our meetings with centering moments, and we have a big commitment to all around the Northern California continuum where we're teaching all of our staff all of this. It's huge.
Is it just classes for adults, or do they have classes for kids, or where can you, if your teachers aren't exposing them, where can you send your kids if they want to learn mindfulness?
That's harder.
Okay.
And it's harder for two reasons. One, because there aren't very many programs. There are that are not secular. There are some programs that aren't secular that are going on with kids. But the other reason that it's hard is because of what I said earlier about school being somehow the best place for it. It's like if it's a weekend and your kid has a choice between like a play date or soccer and you're like, oh, how about mindfulness? They're definitely not going to choose that. Again, it's one of those moments when it's like you can make the invitation, but if it's not taken, then I just say let them play soccer.
Just to follow, what is the data showing for like kids that are exposed to it in elementary school or middle school? What are the long-term benefits, and do they continue it on their own, or?
The field is relatively new, like maximum a decade old, basically. I mean, there have been things happening for a while, but in terms of anybody putting efforts on research, it's new. So there's a ton of things that still need to be researched. Some of the basics I mentioned earlier, but no one has done a longitudinal study yet. So that's one of the on the wish list.
Where is that?
Let me just pull back over here.
So you talk about what you do when you go into an elementary school and how you kind of start the kids. Have you worked with high school students, and is there a difference in what you do when you start out on a program like that, mindfulness program?
In terms of the content or the structure?
Well, yes, both.
Yeah.
What does it look like? Is it different?
It does look really different in a high school because it's hard to, when we were in elementary schools, we could see all the classrooms in one day because everybody is staying in one classroom. When you get to kids changing classrooms, you'd need like 15 mindfulness teachers to cover all the class bases. Or get all the teachers trained so that they're implementing it for like 5 minutes at the beginning of every class. And so it's harder. So what's happened in high schools is that we've either done just a few classrooms, like 2 to 4 classrooms, and the content is similar, but a little bit more cognitive, a little bit more discussion-based, heavier emphasis on emotions and relationship type stuff. So it gets deeper and juicier a little bit, but still short. So you still are aiming really just for the technique, just for like the drop-in. But then the other thing that we've done is longer programs, both in like the lesson itself and also ongoing. So you grab a group of kids that meet after school for 60 minutes or 90 minutes once a week. And you get a different dynamic there. It becomes more like a support group, usually a smaller group, and usually kind of a little bit more pointed in terms of what they're addressing. So there's some obstacles in doing it in high school, and then there's some really beautiful alternatives. A couple more.
So it sounds like there are a few teachers here that are implementing. Is there any sort of talk on a larger scale with this district of partnerships with specific, is it by principal in terms of interest or?
You know, I have found there are, like in the country, there are some district-wide initiatives with different, mostly social emotional learning programs, but also some mindfulness programs. My preference is that it grows more organically and that it is more staff-based, that like a staff comes together and they decide either we all want to do this together or actually you 5 are so interested, go take the training and run with it. And then it kind of builds more naturally from that. And there's a value of the teachers who are already personally inclined in getting them trained. Because if it kind of becomes a mandate, I just feel like it gets diffused and there's not a lot of energy behind it.
Well, it can really backfire.
Yeah.
Because I see that even when we have managers leading like a centering moment or something at workforce in Kaiser, if that person themselves have not become established like authentically first, then you can just watch the whole centering moment go quite amok. But that being said, I think that it doesn't take so much maybe to have just a simple process taught. And having those people who are really passionate, authentically involved, like really being the champions for it in a school.
Yeah.
And then with that comfort, I think other adults who have not been so comfortable sitting with themselves, then to begin to feel a little bit safer.
Right.
And that's, like you say, that becomes the ripple effect. It's just so beautiful.
Right. I'm tracking the time,
Yeah.
so I want to honor the time, and I would like, if you don't mind, to end with just another little short kind of coming in piece. And maybe before you close your eyes, just picking a touch point, so either your feet on the ground or how your hands are touching or your bottom on the chair, so one of those touch points, and then one sense door. So right now it will probably either be seeing or hearing. And kind of the ability to hold both those things at once. So like your feet on the ground and seeing, or your bottom on the chair and hearing. And then just a reference to your entire posture, your body right now. And if you're really just dropping in your body, is there one word that describes how you feel physically right now? Just noticing that. And then just directing your awareness just kind of in an open way to just your mental experience, mental, emotional, psychological state. Maybe one word that describes that right now. Not trying to figure it out, no thinking, just if there is, that's fine. If not, just resting. And then a deep breath. And again, as you're opening your eyes, just letting some of the attention be in. And just seeing how long that stays available as you start to kind of conclude and move on out. So thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure being here with you tonight, and good luck